During the rise of the Third Reich, the hierarchs of the National Socialist regime led lives marked by luxury, opulence, and privilege. Thanks to efficiently organized administrative and economic structures, they amassed enormous fortunes and adopted a lifestyle similar to that of the old European nobility. Palaces, mansions, armored trains, customized automobiles, and vast art collections made up the usual surroundings of figures like Adolf Hitler, Hermann Guring, and Heinrich Himmler. The Führer's closest circle resided in imposing properties such as Karinhal, Göring's estate in the Prussian forests, or the Berghof, Hitler's alpine retreat in the Bavarian Alps. They traveled in luxurious armored Mercedes-Benz 770Ks, symbols of power and sophistication, while Hitler used his special train, the Führersonderzug, equipped as a mobile headquarters with a conference room and defense systems. Their daily lives included banquets with silverware, imported wines, and hunting events organized for the party elite. They enjoyed vacations in exclusive spas like Bad Gastein or in the resort complexes of Obersalzberg, always surrounded by confiscated art, exclusive designer furniture, and a retinue of personal servants. Blood monuments, the sumptuous homes of the men of the Reich. During the rise of National Socialism, the high-ranking Nazis enjoyed unprecedented wealth, comparable only to the old German nobility that ruled the country during the monarchy era. This was reflected in the luxurious quarters of the Führer and his trusted men such as Hermann Guring. Indeed, Göring owned one of the most impressive estates of the Nazi era, Karinhal. In 1933, the Prussian state donated about 120 hectares of land to Hermann Guring in his role as Minister-President of Prussia for his lifetime use and enjoyment. This region is one of the largest forested areas in Germany, and even at that time it was considered one of the most beautiful regions in the country. Göring began building an enormous estate complex with a mansion to host the Nazi leadership. In 1937, the new Karinhal was officially inaugurated. The area had ceased to be a simple hunting lodge and became a massive mansion in the woods. The new complex consisted of a two-story main building flanked by two wings. Everything was arranged around a large interior courtyard, which was accessed via an avenue framed by two rows of ancient trees. The original building was known as the Grosshalle, where Göring entertained guests around a large fireplace and a panoramic window overlooking the forest. The living room led to two rooms known as the Gold Hall and the Silver Hall, where the minister permanently displayed the gifts given to him by nobles and the wealthy. The entire mansion was surrounded by beautiful gardens adorned with life-sized bronze statues of animals. Every window had magnificent views of the lakes and forests. Göring and his wife lived in the central building. The left wing consisted of a music room, a huge library, a gym, sauna, and an indoor pool. The right wing had been designated as the guest wing and included bedrooms, a dining room, kitchen, and staff accommodations. It must be said that Göring was a benevolent boss to his staff, and the service quarters were comfortably furnished. In the new Karinhal, the rooms featured a luxurious and ornate style, using the finest materials available. The floors were polished marble and covered with expensive carpets. Paintings by Cranach and Rubens hung on the walls, sometimes stacked 3 and 4 layers high. This opulence even contrasted with how the Führer himself lived. With more reclusive habits, Hitler preferred to live in a very luxurious apartment located at number 16 Prinzregentenplatz in the Bogenhausen district of Munich. The apartment occupied the entire third floor of an imposing 5-story building, designed in the Jugendstil, Art Nouveau style by Munich architect Franz Popp between 1907 and 1908. Hitler moved there in 1929, but in January 1935 he hired the Atelier Troost to renovate and redecorate the spacious flat at the outrageous cost of 120,000 German marks, more than 10 times the average salary of the time. On April 25, 1935, when the apartment was nearly complete, the Daily Telegraph published an article about the renovations, claiming that the Führer was supervising the works and that all the furnishings and decorations were being executed according to Mr. Hitler's own designs. This article, written by the Nazi press, described the Führer's love for German art and his passion for music, telling readers that the decoration of his apartment follows the heroic German color palette of blue, gold, and white, popularized in Wagner's operas, and the furniture is of the same style. The propaganda's goal was to portray Hitler as an artist and connoisseur of fine culture, to capture the attention of the German upper class, his neighbors in Munich's richest district. The Führer used this place not only to rest, but also to make deals and conduct German politics. In this luxurious apartment, the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia was signed, and the conspiracies for the future invasions of Poland and France began. As he rose to power, Hitler spent less and less time in Munich, dividing his time between the old Chancellery, strategic command centers, and the Berghof. Almost immediately after completing the works on his Munich apartment, Hitler undertook a major expansion and renovation of the Haus Wachenfeld, a modest chalet in Obersalzberg, the place that most Germans identified as their Führer's home. The construction began at the end of 1935, and upon completion, the house became known as the Berghof, a vast and carefully guarded complex. The structural expansion was carried out based on Hitler's proposals by Bavarian architect Alois Degano. The interiors were done by Atelier Troost, also in close collaboration with Hitler. Most of the private photographs released of Hitler were taken here, as the mountain served to humanize the German leader through his interactions with animals and children. It was common to see him in newspapers off-duty, handing out treats to deer and small children under the seemingly perpetual sunshine of the Alps. To the entire world, the renovated Berghof proclaimed Hitler's maturity and confidence. In its majestic and carefully designed spaces, Germany's leader greeted kings and princes, prime ministers and marshals, religious leaders, secretaries of state and ambassadors. It was there that he negotiated with the European powers that stood between him and his vision of a greater German Reich. Like the renovation itself, the Great Hall, the centerpiece of the Berghof, was intended to showcase Hitler's new power, not as the ex-corporal inciting rebels in beer halls, nor as the dictator who killed his opponents in cold blood, but rather as a powerful, cultured, and above all, trustworthy statesman. Hitler spent more than a third of his 12 years in power at his mountain home. Not even a war seemed reason enough to sacrifice his pleasures, and after 1939, the Berghof became a military headquarters from which he directed battles and planned strategies. It is said that Hitler was a pioneer of remote work, and the Great Hall was the central axis of his intention to rule an empire from the comfort of his living room sofa. The Great Swindler, how Hitler amassed his fortune by defrauding Germany. But real estate was not the only fortune Hitler possessed. The Führer died a wealthy man, with the coffers of German banks and secret accounts in Switzerland overflowing. His passion for money began long before he became the leader of Germany, when he was recognized as an ideologue. Although austere in terms of his public image, Hitler liked to live large. He strictly controlled the income he received from the articles he wrote and from the publishing rights of his photographs. Hitler considered himself a genius who had not been recognized, and with the aim of changing that situation, he became interested in power, money, and his own progress up the social ladder. More than once, Hitler himself meticulously described his poverty and hardships while striving to become an artist in Vienna before the First World War, although he had received a small inheritance. Being poor deeply embarrassed him. In his book Mein Kampf, from which he earned millions in sales, he emphasized the struggle for existence of the newly rich who, according to Hitler, through their own effort had achieved a higher social position, one that suppresses all compassion and eliminates any feeling for the misery of those who fell out of the system. More than once, Hitler demonstrated that becoming rich was one of the major goals of his life. However, Hitler also spent millions on generous gifts and contributions to buy the loyalty of politicians and businessmen, with the intention of making them dependent on him. But later, he would recover all those expenses with interest. In his role as Führer, Hitler made almost no distinction between his own money and that of the Nazi Party, and even the state coffers. There is much evidence of the Führer's morbid tax evasion and financial corruption. In his summer residence in Obersalzberg, Bavaria, or in his own collection of artworks, Hitler freely used state funds and never paid taxes. If we take as a reference what he should have earned as the head of state of Germany, Hitler should have made around 7,800,000 Reichsmarks from the Third Reich. However, it is now known that from the moment he became Chancellor in 1933 until his death, he amassed a tremendous fortune of 700 million Reichsmarks, more than 3 billion euros in today's value. Much of this money came from shady deals with businessmen, overpricing agreements, theft and expropriations from Holocaust victims, and acts of corruption in which he embezzled the Reich's treasury. After the war, Hitler's properties and assets, including a house in Munich that he had built for Eva Braun, were handed over to the Bavarian state by the Allies. Hitler had no children, and although he died without direct heirs, his deceased half-sister, Angela Raubal, did have them, and there are other descendants of Hitler's mother who live in the Waldviertel region in northern Austria. These presumed heirs asked Werner Maser, a popular German historian of the Nazi period, to review what rights they might have, although since they never agreed among themselves, there have been no legal claims so far to reclaim the assets which continue to belong to the German government. Fury and metal, Mercedes-Benz and the luxurious cars of Nazism. Among the luxuries that Hitler enjoyed as leader of the Nazi Party were the finest cars that Germany could produce, the Mercedes-Benz. To this day, they are among the most elegant and best-designed cars in the world. The relationship between Hitler and the automobile manufacturer would last nearly 2 decades, and the company would produce numerous vehicles and other equipment for the German war effort. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was no doubt that German engineering held a leading and dominant position. Although Germany's manufacturing and industrial output could not match that of the United States, the fact that automobiles could be developed for the first time in Germany demonstrated a genuine capacity for imaginative engineering that would find real competition in only a few Western countries during the first half of the 20th century. The name Mercedes came from one of the company's sales agents, Emil Jelinek, who in the early 20th century was dissatisfied with the short-wheelbase Daimler engine cars. Jelinek, an Austro-Hungarian consul in Germany, had a penchant for speed. Working as a Daimler sales agent in Nice, France, Jelinek ordered a new model, promising to personally purchase the first 36 units, provided that the name of his eldest teenage daughter appeared on the car. He even changed the family surname to Jelinek Mercedes in 1903. The 3-pointed star emblem, inspired by Gottlieb Daimler, symbolizes land, air, and sea transport. Ferdinand Porsche joined Benz and became chief engineer in 1923. Due to the severe crisis affecting Europe, the two companies merged in 1926 to become Daimler-Benz. The cars produced at Daimler soon came to be called Mercedes-Benz as well, sometimes abbreviated as MBZ in automotive literature. Porsche created the supercharged Mercedes series, of which the SSKL Supersport Kurzleicht became the epitome of performance. Its distinctive sound was attributed to the so-called elephant blower supercharger, which produced a powerful roar by nearly doubling the power. In 1929, Dr. Hans Niebel took over as chief engineer and developed the Mercedes-Benz 500K and 540K, which became legendary for their performance and aesthetics. Hermann Ahrens was the in-house body designer in Sindelfingen, where MBZ 512DB 600 engines were later built for Luftwaffe planes like the Messerschmitt Me 109. These cars became a symbol of the SS, and several customized versions were used by the highest-ranking officers. Hitler had good reason to be proud of his country's finest automobile. In 1939, when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, Hitler gifted a supercharged Mercedes-Benz Roadster with a rear seat to Joseph Stalin. After the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, breaking the non-aggression pact, Stalin refused to use the car and gave it to one of his generals. Hitler used a total of 5 convertible touring cars of the 770K type for his entourage in Germany. However, the Führer himself traveled in a hard-top, heavily protected car. The fact that Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914 while riding in a convertible may have influenced Hitler to always use closed Mercedes-Benz sedans, unless he was parading for show. This precaution was confirmed after the assassination of General Reinhard Heydrich in Prague in 1942 in a convertible. Afterward, Hitler ordered 20 armored MBZ 540K sedans. Hitler had already opted for heavily armored limousines and had previously ordered 2 more 770K models. The 770K model was known as the Großer Mercedes Offener Tourenwagen, With its inline 8-cylinder engine of 7,655 cubic centimeters, a single overhead camshaft and dual carburetor producing 230 horsepower when the supercharger was activated, the vehicle could reach 193 kilometers per hour, despite weighing 4,500 kilograms. Its massive weight was partly due to additional 6mm armor on the floor and 3mm armor on the doors, as well as 40mm thick bulletproof glass. There were 3 foldable seats behind the driver's seat, allowing the car to accommodate a total of 9 people. Fully upholstered in leather, it had a 5-inch raised floor on the right side so that Hitler would appear taller when standing. The front seat folded back to give him more space while standing in that position. The car had a 51-gallon fuel tank and a range of 150 miles, but could achieve only 3 miles per gallon in the city. The car also featured independent spring suspension on all 4 wheels, dual-system power brakes, and 8.25 by 17-inch tires. Hitler ordered another fully enclosed Mercedes 770K in 1943, equipped with a reinforced steel roof with armor, in addition to the armor and amenities of his previous cars. Hitler wanted to convey to the world the superiority of German engineering. At that time, Germany lagged behind in motorization. Hitler promised the German people that he would rapidly develop the automotive industry and launched a program to quickly build a network of highways, the first of which was inaugurated in May 1935. With government support, Mercedes-Benz doubled its production from 6,000 cars in 1932 to 12,000 in 1934. By 1935, that figure had more than doubled again, reaching 25,000. While the exact number of armored 770K cars manufactured by the German company is unknown, it is known that other high-ranking Nazis such as Göring, Himmler, and Goebbels had their own models at their disposal. Steel colossi, the Führer's impressive armored trains, but cars were not the only excessively protected means of transport used by the Nazi hierarchs. The Führer's Sonderzug, or Führer's special train, was the means of transportation Adolf Hitler used for his long journeys across Germany and Europe. Its history dates back to 1937, when Hitler commissioned a special train from the Deutsche Reichsbahn for his travels. After 2 years of development, the train was ready by August 1939. It was initially named Führersonderzug America and later Brandenburg. During the war, the train served as the Führer's mobile headquarters until the Balkan campaign. However, Hitler continued traveling on it throughout the war between his headquarters. The train weighed 1,200 tons and reached a maximum length of 430 meters. It could travel at speeds between 80 and 120 kilometers per hour. The carriages were not armored but were standard transport wagons adapted to meet the Führer's needs. For example, Hitler's private carriage included a marble bathroom reinforced with a concrete cover to prevent assassination attempts. The carriages were built in the 1930s by 3 German companies: Henschel and Son, Krauss Maffei Wegmann, and Crede. The interior was designed by a well-known Munich firm in a simple Art Deco style. Each carriage was equipped with heating and air conditioning, something quite unusual at the time. The configuration of the train varied depending on the needs and the number of people on board, from 10 to 16 wagons and a length between 300 and 430 meters. The train could carry more than 200 people. However, the layout of the main wagons remained unchanged, as they included the defense and communications wagons as well as Hitler's personal carriage. The exact composition of the train is unknown, but historical studies show that the train was equipped with 2 locomotives, allowing the convoy to operate even if one engine failed. However, since they used steam engines, the locomotives had to be replaced every 200 kilometers with a new one loaded with coal. On both sides of the train was an anti-aircraft vehicle, the SDPL 4I-39, each equipped with 2 flak-Vierling 38 4-barreled anti-aircraft guns, with central space for the crew and ammunition to defend against ground and air attacks. The 20mm anti-aircraft cannons had a range of up to 4.7 kilometers on the ground and 2,500 meters in height, with a firing rate of 800 rounds per minute. Hitler's personal car, or Führerwagen, was a DRB Pullman car and included an antechamber guarded by 2 bodyguards, a lounge with a large table and maple veneer sofas, Hitler's bedroom with a simple single bed, a marble bathroom, 3 guest rooms, a shower room, and another antechamber with 2 more bodyguards. The command and communications car included a conference room and was equipped with all the most modern communication devices, a strategy room and telecommunications rooms with teleprinters and encryption devices, a telephone switchboard for internal and external calls, and a radio room with an Enigma machine to encode and decode messages. The rest of the train consisted of wagons for SS personnel, political entourages, and guests. This train played a leading role in the Second World War. On September 3, 1939, America was used for the first time as a war headquarters and allowed Hitler to closely follow the campaign in Poland with his staff. In October 1940, Hitler used his special train to travel to France, where he held several diplomatic meetings. In April 1941, the train was parked in Mönchkirchen, a small town near Vienna, where Hitler commanded the attack on Yugoslavia after Mussolini's failed attempt to conquer Greece. He celebrated his 52nd birthday there with his team. In August 1941, Hitler and Mussolini met at Anlage Süd to discuss the management of the campaign against the Soviet Union. This facility consisted of 2 reinforced tunnels built 30 kilometers apart to protect 2 trains from potential bombings. Hitler's train was parked in the Strzyżów tunnel and Mussolini's in the Stepina tunnel. Finally, on May 7, 1945, after Hitler's death, the SS decided to blow up and burn his personal carriage near Malnitz. Another major Nazi railway project was the Breitspurbahn, or broad gauge railway, proposed by Adolf Hitler during the height of the Nazi regime. It was intended to use double-decker cars to connect the major cities of Großdeutschland, the expanded Germany Hitler envisioned after conquering Europe. As Germany grew under the fist of Nazism, commercial and civil traffic increased due to economic incentives, and the German railways faced a serious capacity problem. As a result of this situation, and partly driven by his military goals, the government began preparing plans to modernize the railway network and increase its transport capacity. Hitler believed that the internationally used standard gauge was obsolete and too narrow for the full development of the railways. Furthermore, his vision of the future German Empire as essentially a land-based empire led him to imagine the new railways as a terrestrial equivalent to the ocean liners and cargo ships that connected the British Empire. Hitler accepted a suggestion from Fritz Todt to build a new imperial gauge railway of high capacity, with a significantly wider track gauge reaching 3 meters. The objections from railway experts were numerous. For example, they foresaw difficulties in introducing a new gauge incompatible with the existing one. They proposed building quadruple standard gauge lines instead, and couldn't envision any use for the vast transport capacity of such a railway. However, these objections were ignored by Hitler, who ordered the first Breitspurbahn lines to be constructed between Hamburg, Berlin, Nuremberg, Munich, and Linz. However, it never developed beyond the planning of the line and some initial topographic work. Due to the economic reparations imposed on Germany after its defeat in the First World War, the German railway company Deutsche Reichsbahn lacked the money for proper expansion and sufficient maintenance of its track network and rolling stock for several years. Moreover, the new locomotives and carriages were extremely expensive to prototype, so the project was forgotten as Germany began to lose the war. The Nazi culture of looting, the unscrupulous theft of art and artifacts. Of all the disgraceful art thefts in history, the one perpetrated by the Third Reich was the most monumental, with the looting of more than 20% of European art by the end of World War II, in part due to the systematic attack on modernism, and in part derived from Hitler's desire to open a Führer Museum, a sort of universal art museum in his hometown, Linz, Austria, where he would exhibit all the most valuable and acclaimed works of European art. Members of the Nazi Party began looting and hiding artworks in places like the Musée Jeux de Paume in Paris, the Nazi headquarters in Munich, as well as in caves and mines in Merkers, Altaussee, and Siegen. This attack on culture prompted an Allied response, and volunteers began to hide and protect works in national institutions, although private collections were often confiscated, as they had little protection. From the Louvre Museum in Paris to the British National Gallery, workers and resistance volunteers began relocating artworks to shelters to protect them from Nazi looting. From rural monasteries to a vast slate quarry in Wales, European art was hidden in the most unexpected places to preserve the cultural heritage of numerous countries and centuries. Despite these efforts, thousands of artworks were stolen from individual and institutional owners, circulating through the homes and professional offices of some of the most influential members of the Nazi movement. Motivated by Hitler and Goebbels, the Nazi Party's interest in art arose early on, and the confiscation of works began in 1938. The Nazis wanted to rid Germany of art created during the Weimar Republic, the period from 1924 to 1930, the time when Germany was a major European cultural center, especially in the fields of art, cinema, and literature. The decadence of Weimar sparked Nazi anger, and Hitler began closing art schools in 1933, aiming to purge so-called degenerate art from German public institutions. Among the artworks considered degenerate by the Nazis were modern French and German artists in the realms of Cubism, Expressionism, and Impressionism. Approximately 16,000 pieces were removed, and by 1938 the Nazi Party had declared the purge of all German art museums. Following the Nazi purges, state-sponsored exhibitions of this art were organized to clarify to Germans which types of modern art were now unacceptable in the new German Reich. Shortly thereafter, in 1939, a public auction of 126 degenerate artworks was held at the Fischer Gallery in Lucerne, Switzerland, to raise funds for the party. The auctioned paintings by modern masters, many of which had previously been removed from German public institutions, included works by Van Gogh and Matisse. Hitler wanted a new wave of cultural and artistic creativity to emerge in Germany, with a race-conscious perspective of Nazi culture, replacing what he called the Jewish decadence of the Weimar Republic. According to the Nazis, acceptable and desirable art included Flemish and Dutch Old Masters, medieval and Renaissance German artworks, Renaissance and Baroque Italian pieces, 18th century French artworks, and 19th century German realist painters. The looting of artworks, which began with an ideological foundation, became an organized government policy. For Nazi officers seeking social status and promotions within the party, collecting and donating artworks affirmed their dedication to promoting Nazi racial ideologies in the Reich. It was a way to emulate Hitler and Göring. However, some high-ranking Nazis deviated from this model. For example, Joseph Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda minister, collected works by German expressionists, and Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop acquired impressionist paintings by Manet. The first official rounds of Nazi confiscations began in Austria after the Anschluss of 1938, the annexation of Austria into the German Reich. The confiscation of art in Poland began in 1939. Shortly thereafter, Nazi bureaucratic agencies were established in the newly occupied territories, tasked with seizing artworks. For example, collections belonging to prominent Jewish families in Vienna were among the first to be confiscated by the Nazis, and Jews who did not plan to leave Greater Germany were required to register their personal property with the local police. Artwork soon became a means of financing exit visas and taxes. Many people persecuted by the Nazis, or political opponents of Hitler, tried to flee Germany in the mid-1930s. When the Nazis banned the export of paper currency, wealthy emigrants began investing in art. Due to the lack of usable foreign currency, artworks were often used as an alternative to money. Even in 1939, art could only be taken out of Germany as personal property. Thus, art became cash for slave traders, Nazis and non-Nazis alike, and for victims of Nazism, who used it as a liquid and secure asset. Almost every European art dealer who bought and sold to Germans and Nazis took advantage of ignorant or poorly informed clients in occupied areas, and both occupiers and occupied exploited each other. Jews owned many of the best-known art houses, and some were art dealers. In April 1938, Göring issued the Decree on the Declaration of Jewish Property, which required that by no later than June 30, 1938, every Jew in the Reich must assess all their properties, domestic and foreign, and report their findings to the Nazi authorities. Confiscated artworks were often reserved for Nazi and German private collections, while some pieces were sold to buyers in neutral countries like Switzerland to raise capital for acquiring more artworks and materials for the Nazi war machine. In addition, Switzerland offered a vast market for the sale of degenerate art. The Paris art market was the most active during the war years. French auction houses and dealers sold artworks at exorbitant and inflated prices to interested Germans. The artistic treasures of the Netherlands were next in popularity for art looting, and the Italian market also overflowed with dealers who took advantage of Germans and Nazis by inflating prices and earning abusive profits at the expense of their German allies. As art confiscations expanded during the war, the Nazis devised a plan to ship the works back to Germany and Austria. They began storing them in salt mines and caves to protect them from Allied bombings. These mines and caves offered ideal humidity and temperature conditions for preserving artworks. In 1945, after the war ended, the Allies found dozens of official and hidden vaults filled with thousands of invaluable artworks, sculptures, and artifacts. The vast majority of them were relocated thanks to extensive cultural recovery programs that continue to this day. The devil wears fashion, the elegant designer uniforms of the SS. Much can be said about the terrible and abominable Nazi regime, but one thing is undeniable: its great sense of aesthetics and propaganda. A system that approached perfection, a militia corps that was disciplined and skilled, and, of course, the pursuit of an ideal of visual and aesthetic superiority. That is why much has been said about the uniforms during the Third Reich's reign as the most visible and outstanding part of the quest to appear and feel supreme. To fully understand this strong sense of identification pursued by the Third Reich, one must go back to the early 20th century. At that time, Germans experienced difficulties in affirming a sense of likeness among themselves, partly due to the unification of dissimilar territories that occurred under Otto von Bismarck's leadership. This grouping of different, though compatible, states resulted in a vast territory where people and customs were very similar to each other, but not truly a nation. This was reflected in the soldiers' uniforms, which were all different from one another, when one of the most important aspects of a uniform is precisely to generate a sense of belonging among those who wear it. By the time World War I arrived, although all soldiers of this forming Germany wore a single outfit and color, that attire lacked identity. The National Socialist Party emerged to restore pride in the German people after being defeated and humiliated by the victors of the First World War. This people bore the stigma of having caused the war, which led the international community to shun them and impose exorbitant reparations. It was not a good time to be German, and many people were ashamed of it. It was precisely in that gap of self-esteem that the Nazi Party found its opportunity to rally the masses of Germany. Hitler understood clearly that he had to give the population a sense of belonging. That is why, to consolidate a strong Aryan identity, he needed, among other things, the right uniform. Many historians and experts argue that there is a general fantasy surrounding uniforms, as they suggest community, order, competence, and legitimate authority. This view gives the attire tremendous significance, implying that wearing it authorizes the atrocious acts that Germans would carry out. In more blunt terms, the uniform makes the Nazi, transforming him into a being for death and destruction. Adolf Hitler began this aesthetic reform with his personal troops and militia, the SS. This group of loyal soldiers served as the Führer's confidants and private guard, given that early in his rise to power he could not fully trust the German army. Its two main branches were the Allgemeine SS, or General SS, and the Waffen-SS, the Armed SS. The Allgemeine SS was responsible for enforcing Nazi Germany's racial policy and acted as a general police force, while the Waffen-SS were combat troops within the German armed forces. A third group, the SS Totenkopfverbände, operated the concentration and extermination camps and were the forces in charge of the most inhumane tasks of the Third Reich. This select group of loyal servants began wearing the classic and elegant black uniform, adorned with the SS symbol and the characteristic skull, which would go down in history as the military attire of Nazism. Leaving aside that the SS was undoubtedly one of the most sinister, cruel, and inhumane paramilitary forces in history, it is irrefutable that their uniforms were among the most elegant ever created. There are reasons, coldly calculated by the German leaders, why this was so. Firstly, it was not just an outfit, it was crafted extremely professionally, meaning it was a high-quality product. Depending on the rank and hierarchy, each uniform had its variants for formal events, parades, or combat. The Nazis loved symbolism and visual appeal. They wanted to be proudly recognizable, as they believed they were the superior race. That's why they pursued the idea of turning the aesthetics of the Third Reich into something iconic. The Nazi leaders, and particularly Adolf Hitler, an aspiring artist, knew the power of image and understood that to make a powerful impression on the world, they needed a monumental propaganda machine. The cultural production of Nazi Germany, beyond its nefarious ideology, has been respected afterward, from cinema to photography to the visual arts and music. And all this culture and its figures had to be dressed, uniformed, in a way that made them look superior, like the leaders of the planet. The minds behind the design of these uniforms were the artist Karl Diebitsch and the graphic designer Walter Heck, both fervent followers of the Nazi regime. However, one key piece was still missing: one of the greatest clothing designers in history, Hugo Boss. In April 1931, when Hitler had not yet come to power, Boss decided to enlist in the Nazi Party. His membership number was 508,889. There, the tailor realized that the big business lay in outfitting Hitler's troops. By 1933, Hugo Boss had already decided that his future would be to supply clothing for the Waffen-SS, an elite corps created by Hitler for high protection. The SA, a paramilitary organization of the National Socialist Party, and the Hitler Youth in its entirety. From that moment on, orders at his small workshop multiplied until, years later in 1935, Boss decided to abandon civilian clothing production and dedicate himself exclusively to manufacturing uniforms. At that time, accounting for all branches of Nazism, the workshop was producing more than 3 million of these outfits. In 1939, with the invasion of Poland, the brand grew exponentially as orders came in to outfit Hitler's new soldiers and citizens. Boss had already become one of the richest businessmen in all of Germany. The small workshop in Metzingen had become the second most important textile company in the Reich, generating millions in profits each year. As the war spread across Europe, most of the workshop's workers were called to the front lines. However, none other than Hitler's troops came to his aid. They supplied him with around 200 prisoners from concentration camps, mostly Jews, to be used as slave labor, a resource the textile entrepreneur did not hesitate to exploit. With the end of the war, things changed drastically for Hugo Boss, who went from being a recognized businessman to being accused of collaborating with the Third Reich. The businessman was declared a beneficiary of the Nazi regime, and his company was classified as important in the economic structure of Hitler's dictatorship. These two accusations led to Boss losing his right to vote and being fined 100,000 Reichsmarks, about $213,000 today. While it is true that the company participated in the growth of Nazi Germany, it was not found guilty of crimes against humanity. Bourgeois vices, the mistresses of the top leaders of the Reich. Although the Nazis valued and promoted traditional family values, there are hidden stories that show their style was more "do as I say, not as I do." Propaganda encouraged German women to be faithful to their husbands, to raise many children, and to stay at home taking care of the household. While the Nazis did not reject extramarital sex, they usually recommended relationships for reproductive purposes. "The Reich needs children," the radio would proclaim in middle and upper-class homes. However, the Nazi leaders with extreme power and influence were known to have several affairs that, despite being shrouded in secrecy, eventually came to light. The first case worth mentioning is that of Heinrich Himmler, who had 2 children with his secretary. Himmler was the head of the infamous SS, a special force that functioned as Hitler's paramilitary right hand, and also as bodyguards to the major figures of Nazism. This sinister man was the chief architect of the Holocaust, namely the systematic enslavement and slaughter of more than 6 million Jews. According to several rumors, Himmler remained a virgin until his mid-20s. It is believed that the Nazi leader was afraid of sex, although it is unclear whether this stemmed from an old teenage trauma or was a personal ideological choice. Many historians lean toward the latter, as in 1928, Himmler married Margaret Boden, and the couple had a daughter named Gudrun. In the early years, the marriage was happy, but as Himmler gained more power, he began to lose his scruples. In 1939, he started an affair with his secretary, Hedwig Potthast, nicknamed Bunny, who was 12 years younger than him. The romance lasted for years and was quite fruitful and passionate. They had 2 children together, Helga and Nanette Dorothea. To spend more time with Bunny, Himmler built her a house in Berchtesgaden, a popular vacation area for the Nazis. According to Himmler's inner circle, the Nazi was truly in love with Bunny and not with his wife. Those close to the SS leader claimed that his young lover made him more relaxed and human. Needless to say, by the time their second baby arrived, everyone knew about Himmler's secret affair, including his wife. Upon learning of it, Margaret felt humiliated. The couple no longer loved each other, and after their separation, Himmler maintained a very close relationship with his daughter until the day he committed suicide by poisoning himself with cyanide at the end of the war. Another rogue was Martin Bormann, Hitler's brutal private secretary, who gained obscene power through his control over the Führer's schedule. Bormann was married to Gerda Buch, a woman known for her beauty. It would be hard to say Bormann was bored with his partner. They had 10 children together. However, the beautiful Gerda was not enough to satisfy Bormann's insatiable sexual desire, and he had several mistresses. One of his favorites was the German actress Manja Behrens, with whom he fell madly in love, to the point that he confessed the affair to his wife. Although Gerda was a strong-willed woman, her reaction was surprising. She supported her husband's relationship, insisting that Manja move into their home. Her idea was that Manja would be sexually available to her husband when Gerda was pregnant. Gerda even proposed a contract that would grant her husband's mistress the same rights she had as the legitimate wife. She even wanted to propose to Adolf Hitler a law allowing Aryan men to have 2 wives. Obviously, this was too much for Manja, who broke off the romance with Bormann. Instead of having a twisted sexual relationship with one of the top Nazi officials, she chose to work long hours in a weapons factory. After the Second World War, she became a successful actress and married the set designer Karl von Appen. In the 1960s, she was banned from acting in films after her romance with Bormann became public, although she continued to perform in theatre. And if we're talking about a fondness for actresses, it's impossible not to mention Joseph Goebbels, the skilled minister of propaganda of Nazi Germany. He was one of Adolf Hitler's most loyal collaborators and a fervent advocate of the Holocaust, in addition to practically creating the entire modern theory of political consulting. But besides wielding immense power, Goebbels had an unmatched sexual appetite. Describing all his affairs here would be impossible, so we'll mention the most notable ones. Goebbels was, in fact, married. He wed Magda Ritschl in 1931, who at the time was married to wealthy industrialist Gunther Quandt, whom she cheated on with Hitler's advisor. But their relationship was very strange. As later became known, Magda despised Goebbels and was truly in love with Adolf Hitler, who is believed to have returned her affections, although they never had sexual relations. Reportedly, Magda married Goebbels to be close to Hitler. Despite this, the couple had 6 children. Goebbels also adopted Harold Quandt, Magda's son, from her first marriage. Goebbels was aware of Magda's feelings toward Hitler, and although somewhat jealous, he made sure to get even with his wife. In the film industry, the Minister of Propaganda was known for sleeping with countless aspiring actresses. If you wanted a major role in a film, you had to pass through Goebbels's bedroom. His obsession with women became problematic when he met the Czech actress Lida Barova, with whom he had a passionate love affair between 1937 and 1938. Eventually, Goebbels told his wife Magda about his Czech lover. He was even considering fleeing with Lida to Japan. The affair was so intense that Magda went to Adolf Hitler and asked for his support. The Führer ordered Goebbels to stop his sexual escapades, claiming that his Minister of Propaganda had to set an example of the image of the perfect family. The Nazis destroyed Lida's acting career. The Gestapo followed her everywhere and made sure to defame her in every possible circle. Although she starred in some Italian films, Lida spent the rest of her life struggling to maintain her acting career. Corrupt metal, the sinister skull rings of Himmler's lodge. Among the strangest luxuries of Nazism, we find the bizarre decorations that Hitler and Himmler awarded to decorated SS officers. Among them were 3 that still hold great historical value due to their design and symbolism: the skull ring, the curved sword, and the honor dagger. The SAS honor ring, better known as the skull ring, was a decoration of the Schutzstaffel. However, it was not an official state recognition, but a personal gift awarded by Heinrich Himmler himself to distinguished members of the SS. It became a highly coveted, unsellable decoration, and even during Nazism, counterfeit replicas were made. The skull ring was initially awarded to senior officers of the SS Old Guard, of which there were fewer than 5,000. Later, it was extended to all SS members who graduated from the Junker schools and other SS training centers. Each ring had the recipient's name, the date of the award, and Himmler's signature engraved on the inside. The ring came with a standard letter from Himmler, containing a general message in which he specified that it should only be worn on the left hand on the ring finger. In the letter, according to Himmler, the ring was a constant reminder to be ready at all times to risk our life for the life of all. As the SS expanded, many did not manage to obtain the ring, so some SS members and police officers commissioned local jewelers to create unofficial versions. If an SS member was dismissed or retired from service, their ring had to be returned. In 1938, Himmler ordered that all rings belonging to deceased SS men and officers be returned and stored in a chest at Wewelsburg Castle. This would be a commemorative monument symbolizing the continued membership of the deceased in the SS order. The symbolism of the ring reflected Himmler's interest in Germanic mysticism and included the Totenkopf, death's head, symbol, associated with the cult of death and Armen and runes tied to Germanic paganism. The ring was designed by Karl Maria Willigut, an Austrian occultist, and manufactured by the family jewelry firm Otto and Carolina Gar of Munich. A sig rune to the left and right of the skull, framed by a triangle, represented the power of the sun and conquering energy. A Hagel rune, symbolizing faith and the camaraderie idealized by the organization's leaders, was also included. The esoteric meaning of the Hagel rune was, according to Guido, "Enclose the universe within you and you will control it." Other runes related to protection against evil and salvation, and the classic swastika completed the iconography engraved on the ring. Over the years, rings with other engraved runes and varied symbolism have been found, but they are believed to be replicas made by local blacksmiths at the request of officers who had not received one from Himmler, or even replicas created in the post-war period. In October 1944, Himmler ordered the halting of ring production and decoration, and all remaining rings, approximately 11,500, were sealed in a hill near Wewelsburg. By January 1945, 64% of the 14,500 rings manufactured had been returned to Himmler following the death of their bearers. Additionally, 10% had been lost on the battlefield, and 26% were still in the possession of their wearers or their whereabouts were unknown. The exact reasons why the SS leader made these decisions are unknown, but it is believed the rings were part of a private lodge that he sought to impose behind Hitler's back, and later regretted in the face of the regime's collapse. Icons of evil, the luxurious swords and honor daggers of the SS. In addition to the mysterious skull rings, SS officers also received expensive swords and daggers as official recognitions for their achievements or fulfillment of duty. The SS Honor Sword was a straight ceremonial sword used with the SS uniform between 1935 and 1945. First presented in 1935, the SS sword was designed by Karl Diebitsch, personal art and design advisor to Heinrich Himmler within the SS. The weapon had a long, thin, straight blade, manufactured in different lengths to suit the height of the bearer. The Degen's hilt featured a D-shaped knuckle bow and a black ribbed wooden grip. The handle was bound with silver wire and had an inset disc bearing the SS runes in the form of lightning bolts. The scabbard was painted with black enamel and featured decorative silver fittings at the top and bottom. It was typically worn with an aluminum braided knot, adorned with black SS runes on the handle. The officer's sword was officially awarded with a certificate personally signed by Himmler to selected SS officers in recognition of special merits. It was also awarded to officers graduating from SS officer training centers. The non-commissioned officer version was similar to the officers, but lacked the silver decorations, signifying lower rank. There was also a special version with a Damascus steel blade, an exquisite alloy famous for its veined surface and extreme strength. These swords were extremely rare, as Himmler personally awarded them to a select few, generally high-ranking SS commanders or important businessmen or statesmen holding an honorary rank of at least SS Oberfuhrer. As they were often awarded on the recipient's 50th birthdays, they were also known as birthday honor swords. Nevertheless, the most common recognition was the SS daggers, which were introduced in December 1933 following similar traditions in the Reichswehr, Luftwaffe and Reichsmarine, and were awarded to celebrate the final incorporation of SS men into specialized units each year. The daggers were given in an awards ceremony held on November 9th every year, commemorating the official founding date of the SS. The honor dagger was an official weapon of the SS dress uniform used by all full members. The dagger's design was based on the 16th century Swiss dagger. The center of the blade, wide and long with a spear point, featured a prominent ridge and the official SS motto, "My honor is loyalty," engraved along the blade's major axis. Both the guard and pommel were nickel-plated, and the handle had black inlays, a silver Parteiadler eagle, and the SS symbol. The metal scabbard was lacquered in glossy black with a silver tip and mount. However, the dagger went through several versions during its production period. The first generation, from 1933 to 1935, included the manufacturer's logo, a polished black ebony handle and Roman numerals engraved on the guard, I for Munich, Secu for Dresden, and the Third for Berlin. The second production, from 1936 to 1938, showed the manufacturer's mark with an RZM double-tag code. The scabbard was burnished or painted black, and the Roman numerals were eliminated from the guard. The final production, from 1938 to 1942, included the RZM code, a black painted scabbard, and an eagle insignia inlaid on the handle, usually made of aluminum or a cheaper metal. In addition to these daggers, there was a variant for the SS Old Guard, meaning the founding officers or those who had joined the organization before Hitler's rise to power in 1933. This dagger was identical to the first-generation model, but the scabbard was fitted with a chain made of rectangular plates adorned with Totenkopf skulls, SS runes, and an additional silver ornament with a swastika motif. These daggers, like the skull rings that carried the same symbolism, were typically handed out in person by Heinrich Himmler himself. Some recovered daggers even include the inscription carved into them, "In warm camaraderie, H. Himmler," showing that the recipients were officers especially appreciated by the SS leader. Although the daggers were practically identical to those given to regular officers, the few that have been recovered show they were made with higher quality materials, and on the black market for Nazi artifacts, they are considered rare and extremely expensive collectibles. The production of honor daggers, like most awards, was halted in 1942 due to material shortages and the war effort's demand that all significant raw materials be used for the production of weapons and ammunition.